I'm I Will Dominate, and this is Thorin's channel. The guy who, if I keep on associating with him, will get me banned on Twitch eventually.
Right, this is going to be another one of my Patreon donator discussions. Got an interesting group, got 4 people for this one, so a little bit more than usual. A couple of people you'll know before, and as usual, when we bring in the new people, obviously they start us out with the topics. So the 2 new people we're going to have, it's going to be Kevin and Hades. And Kevin, you were the one who had the topic you wanted to start with, right? Did I get that the wrong way around? Yeah, go on.
Or no, actually, no, I believe it was Hades who wanted to start.
Now, this is when 2 people talk at the beginning. Great, right? Hades, then, what is your opening topic, mate?
So my opening topic was, why do you think that games, battle royale games like Apex Legends, PUBG, things like that, why are they not as entertaining to viewers to watch? There's definitely a big scene out there for them. Fortnite had a big one. ALGS is still ongoing. But as someone who really enjoys playing those games, I also do find them pretty boring to just watch in general. And I really like the games. It's just I'm wondering what you guys think, or why is that? Why can't they make them interesting? What's wrong with them?
I think there are massive observer issues, right? Like in a battle royale game, like some of them have 100 people playing the game at once, and it's just not feasible to have an observer that is somehow managing 100 people or what interactions are happening where. And I also think that due to the nature of like random loot spawns and stuff like that in some of the battle royales, obviously Apex might be a little bit different, that also just kind of, I guess, decreases the ability for skill to be influenced in those games. And as a result, I imagine that that's probably what's holding it back, if I had to guess.
Right, one of the problems basically that esports games have is you're not competing just against like, is the game good? It's you're competing against all other esports games that you could watch. So the issue is, I actually think that all real sports are actually garbage. Like, for example, if you've never seen the traditional angle that they show basketball from is actually terrible. If you saw like a courtside view, it looks about 100 times more entertaining and exciting, but they don't do that. They use the traditional angle because everyone's used to it. If you watch like an NFL game, you can't really see half of what's even happening. The guys are all tiny. There's a million of them on screen. But in an FPS game or a game like League or whatever, you're used to seeing everything that's happening all at once. In an FPS game, you've got an insanely absurd like POV of like all the skill of where he's aiming, how he's shooting. So if you then go to like an FPS game where essentially most of the time you're probably not on the person doing the kill, and it's just going to be inherently frustrating. Like you could actually argue Overwatch had exactly the same problem. You were trying, it was like essentially if you tried to show an NFL game, but people were used to seeing the POV and they want to see all the POVs of all the relevant players in an NFL down, but at the same time and without missing any action. It's almost impossible to do. And if you essentially do it, if people don't know in Counter-Strike, people once tried to rig it like, right, we'll have a delay and then get all the kills. But then that takes all the suspense out because now you know if it flips to that POV, he must get the kill. If it flips away, he doesn't get the kill. So basically, there's a lot of happenstance and luck as to whether games are good to observe. And as you pointed out, there's not really a correlation between how much fun they are to play or how many people play them. It's quite a different area. And then I would also say, because I actually have even interviewed some old school CS players who became like PUBG pros. And when I said to them, like, well, how do you overcome the problem that famously Fortnite had, which is if it is a massive game like a Fortnite pub, then it's terrible to observe. And they said, oh, what you do is you have these like small teams and then there's only like limited spaces they can drop and then you don't get the same like random spot. And so I was like, so it's nothing like the normal version. He's like, oh no, it isn't. So basically, as far as I can tell, there is no way to square that circle. I don't think you can basically fix it. So I haven't played those games much myself, though. So do any other people have any other takes or angles?
Yes, I'm curious. Do you know if that's actually, is that actually the way competitive PUBG is played with the limited spawning and limited places?
As far as I know, I think you just can't do stuff like spawn behind someone, or I think you even decide, like you pre-select what spawn you go to, and so you can choose to battle people at the spawn, or you can go to one that isn't at or something. I don't play it, though. If anyone does, they feel free to speak up.
Well, I mean, for example, I come from CS. Source was my main game back in the day, and I tried Fortnite a couple of years ago, and the gameplay itself was very engaging, fun from a pleb just playing the game point of view. And this was, I think I started playing around the time, this was pre-pandemic, and what was it? Fortnite Championship was going on, the big world championship. And the disconnect that I had as a player was that all the hype on the broadcast, especially in Fortnite, seemed to be around the late game, the late game part where the circle would get really small and everyone would basically have to build up, and that whole meta of there's basically like the game within the game, right? Of like how you're going to build your walls, like in placement, things like that, to where the average player like myself in Fortnite, I rarely get to that part of the game, and I don't see it played out on a day-to-day level at such a level. So for me as a viewer, there was a very big disconnect watching competitive Fortnite compared to the game I experienced, which is, I guess, similar to pubbing League and competitive League.
And it's good you mention that too, Kevin, because another point that I thought was very interesting is it seems like with Fortnite, they very much focused on the bigger names. So I'm talking about people like Ninja, Tim the Tatman, Dr. Lupo. When those guys were originally playing in the scene, it's when you had the most interaction, the most fans watching. And then once they kind of all went away, it seemed much harder to keep the fan interest in that sense. So I was wondering too, does that mean that it's generally, because like you said, there's so many different people, there's hundreds of people playing on these games, is it really just fans want to watch their favorite streamer or favorite personality, as it is, just play the game in general, and they don't actually care about the competitiveness of the game? They just really want to see their favorite guy getting headshots and popping off as much as possible.
I think it's definitely that. Like, I guess the other problem is there's no respawns, right? So like, let's say I'm a Shroud fan or a Ninja fan and they are on a team together. If they die in the first 2 minutes of a 30-minute PUBG game, do you think I'm going to stick around and watch the last 28 minutes just to see like someone else win it? I don't think most people, especially casual fans, are actually interested in the game or like the strategy or tactics being implemented in the game. And as a result, like, they are looking for their team or their personality. And battle royales are really bad at that specific element of showing them the player or the team they want to see play the game.
That makes a lot of sense. Another thing I think is that, if I remember correctly, both of the businesses behind the tournament structures for both Fortnite and PUBG didn't really go anywhere, just to put it lightly. Yeah, like I was just.
What do you mean by that?
I remember like Fortnite had this grand plan for how they were going to grow their scene and expand the competitive scene, and at least from a, like, I don't really follow the scene that much, but whatever plan they had didn't grow the scene or make enough waves to attract my attention as somebody who would just, only watch like the World Championship.
As far as I remember, one of the problems I think Fortnite specifically had, from what I remember, is they do the same trick Valve did, where Valve took the success of Counter-Strike and parlayed it into Steam and then just made a bajillion off Steam. And so why would you waste your time with Counter-Strike anymore? As far as I know, Fortnite just used the fact it was Fortnite to get you on the Epic store or whatever, and then they just made billions off that, didn't they? So I doubt they even give a flying fuck about esports, if I had to guess.
Yeah, and to your point, Thorin, you know how a little while ago there was that League of Legends tournament that was outside where all the players were campaigning.
Yeah, the Mr. Beast one.
Yeah, not the Mr. Beast one, but it was the one where before that, where they were actually outside in the open elements and there was like sun glaring off the screen and things like that. Fortnite had a lot of those tournaments where they were just outside, open, and to me, I always thought that was weird. Like, why are we pretending that gamers are or like professional athletes too, at the same sense? We're sitting in chairs playing games. Why is the sun shining in behind us while we play? It doesn't make any sense.
I'd like to see the sunburn rates from that tournament.
I mean, if you think that's bad, that what's hilarious is in 2015, ESL literally ran a tournament in Dubai and planned to have it outside in the fucking desert at like 6 p.m. or something. And they quickly found out like that would be like inhuman heat, and they had to hold it at night instead, like in a different venue. Because good old ESL in it.
in Dubai, like you said, the desert. Half the esports guys are pale white and pasty. I can just imagine, like you said, what's the over under on sunburns.
Right. That ends the Apex Legends portion of the show. We'll now move into games I care about. Right. Anyone else? Obviously, at this point, Kevin, you should have a topic for us, I hope.
Well, yeah, actually, this is a pretty big topic in League. I think I posted it in the LOL discussion, but obviously the listeners don't know that. So, what is it? That I would figure that T1, if they had extended Faker's contract past this year, that would be a huge announcement that they would, be jumping to make. My question is that since they haven't made that announcement, does that suggest that there's a higher likelihood of Faker leaving? Is it possible that LCK teams tend to negotiate after Worlds and only then?
I do agree. If they could extend him, they probably would already do it and it would be announced. That seems to make sense. The problem is there's a factor I think you haven't counted for, which is Faker is 26 years old, and at some point in time, he will have to go and do the Korean military service. So, it doesn't matter if you're Faker, because they didn't win that fucking Southeast Asia, whatever Asia Games thing. I don't think they've even played it yet. What even happened with it? I think they just didn't play it because of some other shit, right? Maybe MSI or something. I can't remember what the reason was.
If I remember correctly, it got cancelled. Yeah.
But basically, that was the problem. That was what everyone was banking on. Because if you won the gold at that, then you got to didn't have to do the military service, basically. Because if people don't know, even people like Boxer and Flag, they all have to do the military service. The only way you get out is if you have some sort of legit injury that means you can't even do a desk job. Otherwise, it's a minimum of a year, 2 years or something, depending on which gig you end up getting given. So he will have to do that at some point in time. And also, I notice you have taken for granted the fact that he's still going to play League of Legends. I would imagine this might be the human who's played the most League of Legends ever. So I wouldn't be surprised if he just retires this year, mate, especially if he doesn't win Worlds, which doesn't look like he will. I wouldn't be surprised if he just says, right, that's it for me. Retire. I'm sure he's got loads of money. If he was smart, I don't know if this is the case. I would have negotiated when they changed from SKT to T1 for maybe a small piece of equity or something. I don't know, again, behind the scenes, if any of that's the case. But he's certainly gotten paid the last 3 to 4 to 5 years, bigger and bigger and bigger, as the LPL offers have sort of leveraged his money up. So there's a world where maybe he just re-signs as a streamer or ambassador for the team. I would be very surprised if he ever went to any other team, even to China. If people don't know, this has been massively hidden the last few years, but the first couple of generations of Koreans who went to China didn't even give a fuck. They just came back, but only in Korean behind the scenes stuff, and just told everyone it fucking sucks there. The air quality shit, the food is shit. You can't take some of the money out. We've discussed that on past episodes. Basically, it's sort of it's almost like a tariff system where they keep some of it in the country. You have to spend it in a certain way. You can't just withdraw it all, or they put a magical tax on you. I've heard that just makes some of it go back to them. Basically, there's a lot of reasons not to go to the LPL. And if you're Faker, you aren't the guy who's going there to get super paid. Actually, it isn't like people have infinite money there. You're not signing Faker unless he's really good for the 20 million, whatever that was in those past years. If anything, that sounds more like maybe someone in Middle East would sign you for that as some sort of crazy PR exercise. But I actually get the vibe he probably just re-ups with T1 and they just decided to negotiate. Who knows? Maybe they're at the point where they think they can get a better deal by not letting his contract get re-upped, by letting him test free agency, find out not that many people are going to get him anymore, and then maybe he does it. Obviously, there's also the world where he could come to the West. Maybe this is the year he goes to, well, might not be Team Liquid by the bullshit they're saying, but maybe he comes to a LCS team for once. Who knows?
That's true.
I think it's completely wide open.
Am I wrong, or did Monty recently say on a Summoning Insider or one of the betting podcast things that Def just got released from the military service? And I know he was discussing sounds like that's something that Faker should in theory qualify for. I remember you two talking about how they had done a service, but I wasn't sure if that was actually an official.
I don't remember that.
Okay.
I think the rumor was that Def didn't announce he was retiring, so Monty made that suggestion. I don't know what he has behind it.
Okay, I wasn't sure about
that. I think Monty thought the same thing, that Deft would retire to do it, and so since he didn't retire, because obviously we all thought he wasn't going to Worlds, but in the end he's going to Worlds anyway, the implication was maybe that means he's doesn't have to do it, so he's waiting to sort of play his hand differently, but again, that's just speculation.
And I think what you remember, Paul, is Monty was specifically saying one of the two players that should get an exemption would be Faker or Deft. He was basically saying both of them should probably get the exemption if they're going to give one for any reason.
Yeah, I think this Faker, unless he really wants to go somewhere, I think T1 has should do as much as they can to keep him in, because he's the poster child of T1 anyways. So unless it's if Faker really wants to go somewhere, I guess that's the only option. He's going to leave T1.
Well, I mean,
the only thing is, though, I personally would fire him. I would just get a better mid laner, but I'm not there to run T1.
Like
Well,
this
I mean-
off season is going to be crazy. Like just based on the Leaguepedia list of contracts, like a lot of big names in the LPL and LCK are going to be available. Like there's over like 30 big name players. Like just to name a few, you have Ruler and Naguri, Deft, Peanut. I'll just go through the list. Ruler, Naguri, Prince, Deft, Zeka, Beryl, Peanut, Faker, Flandre, LV Mao, Scout, Rich, ironically, Gala, Clid.
How many more is there, mate?
I'm just saying.
That'll do for now. That'll do for now.
Okay, but I'll just add Knight, The Shy, and Doan B as well, because they might go back to Korea.
I don't think there's any universe in which the Chinese player Knight is going to T1 for this mid lane. But what I would say as well as the other factor to consider is maybe Faker's just their coach next year. I think that would even be if I was actually them, by the way, what I would actually try and do, this would be the move I would try and pull off. You can't do it right now because it wasn't on that list, but I would try and get fucking Scout back since he was the fucking protege of Faker and then just have Faker coach him. I think that's the perfect storyline if you write up WWE angle, but
he is available.
Again, no one knows where the Koreans are at. He is on the list?
Yeah.
Then I would 100% get it. I'd go ham for him because you just think about how you connect the storylines, it'd be perfect, wouldn't it?
Returns to the team and, all the bells and whistles you give him, just huge what is it called, parade for him coming back, and you can bring that whole storyline like you said.
I don't think it would be a parade after knowing the T1 fans.
Well, yeah,
and then Faker could sabotage his career and then take his job the next year. It's like the full Bjergsen story.
Yeah, exactly. But then also you mentioned too about him might not even want to play and just sign him as a streamer. I'm sure there's got to be a lot of just name value in having Faker. You could almost just attach him to the brand, and he's got so many years with SKT. They could put his name on a mouse pad or something and sell that, and I'm sure it would do well just by having his name if they can.
The only thing is,
their brand collapses if he's gone. Like, in my opinion, like what else do they have?
Definitely not. That's like saying when Derek Jeter retired, the Yankees were over. You get the analogy?
Yeah.
So the problem is, like, the joke is it's the other way around, mate. Yeah. The fact that, like, T1 hasn't been, they've been the best, obviously, like, the first split of this year, and at times they look good last year. The joke is, actually, those fans are like the fucking Yankees fans, where it's like, they think they should be the best every year, no matter what, even if they're not the best. So I actually think, if anything, they have the opposite problem, which is that when Faker leaves, they will just think, like, right, business as usual, win the next Worlds, win all the LCK. It's like, I don't know, mate. Again, you have to be a good GM to do that. That's sort of competitive angles, isn't it? It's not about how great the org is. So the thing is, of all the orgs that could survive in his T1, the bigger issue for me, I think, is even when you say all that stuff there, it all depends how much money you want to invest. Because if Faker's on the kind of money you hear he's on now, you're not probably going to pay him that to be a streamer. Because again, you're not making profit probably from Faker. I know that sounds mad, but you have to understand it's not an NA market. You're not working with the same people. And even then, half the things in NA, even if people make a lot of revenue, doesn't mean you're making profit from them. So it's always complicated to sort of balance the sheet like that. It's not as simple as like, right, I've got fucking Ronaldo in soccer, so I sell all the jerseys, don't I, and make the money back. It's like, yeah, in soccer you do, but like the other sports esports isn't monetized the same way. So I'd actually have a hard time knowing what the sweet spot would be for how much to pay him to keep the massive brand, because he is T1 in that sense, and how much is like overpaying when maybe he won't even sell that many things. Like maybe as a streamer, it's not that great a deal always. I don't always know.
Yeah, and I don't know how well Faker streams do right now. Like you said, maybe he goes to stream and it's interesting for a little while, kind of like how when Double F first came off of being a pro and he was a bit interesting. And then as you listen to him talk more, you kind of were, well, at least I was like, all right, I'm going to leave that kind of over there. And maybe I'll see a clip every once in a while from something interesting he says, but I'm not going to follow it nearly as much.
Because I actually think they've potentially done damage to the T1 brand by keeping Faker. Because here's the thing, right? Yeah, they won an LCK, brilliant. What else did they win? You know how long it's been since they won Worlds? They won Worlds in 2016, guys. That's 6 years ago. How many MSIs since then? Right, they won in Season 7. That's 2017. Like, those are the international tournaments taken out of the way. Now all you're doing is winning LCKs. Now, those were pretty good, but spoiler, those were fucking super teams. Those were stacked to the roof. Look at the players they had on. The joke was, that was when people, like, it's almost like people were joining, not to ring chase, to actually help Faker win rings. Like, the last half of his career is just other people winning him rings. Sometimes he's the second or third best player, but there's always some other guys that stood. So I actually personally think, I do think he's sort of outstayed his welcome. Like, they've still got a pretty good squad now, and they have a chance to win. But if you're T1, you do want to come into Worlds as like, right, we're one of the top 3 teams in this tournament. We are supposed to win. And if for my money, you'd start with mid links. It's the most important role. So to me, I would want to have a really, really good super godlike mid laner guy. Because for me, despite what you say, Kevin, I agree. Like, in theory, he is the brand now, but it's the same as Bjergsen in TSM. You know, when Bjergsen left TSM, and I told you, in fact, even when Bjergsen was the coach, there was absolutely a scenario where Jensen was willing to join. Dude, if Jensen had joined as the mid laner and then they win a bunch of championships, TSM fans would be absolutely happy. In fact, they'd all pretend they never said anything about Jensen. They love him now. Some of them would even be like, Bjergsen who? Like, jokingly. It wouldn't matter. As long as you keep winning. Really, what makes those orgs famous is winning. It ain't the player. If the player never won, no one would give a fuck. It's winning. So I would always say that winning solves everything. Like, if you win and you're the T1 brand, your fans are going to be well happy, mate. It doesn't matter, I think, if Faker's there or not. They might want Faker to win and be there, but that's, at this point in time, that's becoming like a diminishing returns choice, probably.
What if
Definitely.
Faker? What if Faker?
Go ahead.
I said, what if Faker does the same thing that was Jensen might have done, or Sven did, and just rolls off to support now that he's older? I'm sure he'd make an amazing support.
Not
Honestly.
with Carrier. At least on T1.
Yeah.
Unless, I mean, just a side question. Did that contract change, that only applied to challenger players, correct?
I have no idea what you're referring to, mate.
Like, when
The LCK changed the rules about rookies.
Okay, so it's only rookies. Okay, never mind.
Yeah,
All right,
so I don't think it applies to people.
Oh, you mean the thing where it's
Yeah,
like
I
they were
was
like
thinking-
locked in and like they stayed at an amount? No, that wouldn't apply to Faker.
Okay, that's good. Yeah, but go ahead. Sorry.
I mean, the joke, by the way, they also probably wouldn't do this, but I actually think even the support role swap only made sense when they didn't have Carrier. Like, if I was him, the actual role I would swap to was probably jungle, mate. Like, if you actually look at Faker's career, the joke is, didn't he jungle for Benki and Blank and all those fucking guys? Like, I actually think that's the role he could probably be a monster in. And he could probably even be a monster in T1. Because again, will you gamble on owner? You might if it's to keep Faker.
And
That's
just
true. However, they could bring back Peanut, who's a free agent.
What does bring back mean? Who says he wants to come back? He's on one of the best teams in the world, getting paid megabucks, probably going to win Worlds. You're all operating, I noticed, like it is 2015, and like everyone will do anything to lick Faker's balls and be in T1. Like, mate, if I was Peanut, who was in T1 and got tossed to the side, treated like trash, then I went off, was the MVP elsewhere, I was at Worlds with LPL, then I'm beating T1 with Gen G, I'm playing with Chovy, we're in a god team, we could win everything for years. I ain't going near T1, I would spit in their face. Listen, Peanut won't do that, but I'm not Peanut, obviously.
Damn, I've just been exposed as a massive T1 fan, and I don't know what to do now.
Neither do they. That's the problem.
At least, like you said, though, if he did go to jungle, it is the perfect meta for him. It's really.
You can't really take any of that. Like next year, you don't know what Riot's
yeah.
gonna do for the
That's
meta
true.
and stuff.
That's true. It is a game where you never know what's going to happen in the next day. They might just decide, we're going to change everything about it. But at least right now, it's very, very low econ jungle. He could probably play most of the jungle champions that are really meta right now without any problem.
I'm almost sure he almost certainly plays, like, I can't remember, but I'm almost certain he'll be like a jungle off-roll or something in solo queue. Most of those like super godlike players are. It's why one of the things LS says, but it just doesn't get picked up on very much, is it's absurd how many Western players don't put effort into being like mastering the other roles. So they just don't understand the game fundamentally in those positions, whereas that's why some of the Korean players are just on another level, because you don't have to communicate when you do know what that guy wants and needs and what he's trying to do with this wave and stuff. So I feel like Faker, also, spoiler, if you've never watched Faker's stream, he already does what all the good Korean junglers do, which is use those function keys and spam every single lane continuously, except he does it while he's laning. Like, it's going to be even easier then, bro, if you're just doing like a fucking gromp while you're doing it. Like, that's why that concept was invented. So I feel like he is one of those players players who already has it's actually how he gets by in the last couple of years in league. He just plays the map. He's not even trying to be the best mid laner now, as far as I can tell. It's not like solo killing people. He just plays the map and tries to win League of Legends. So to me, that's why a role swap's probably better, because at this point in time, like, it is still the most important role in the game, mid lane. Like, I don't think he can be at the level he is and probably win Worlds. Like, I know he almost did last year, but even then, who knows what would have happened in that final. I'd like to see it.
And also, to what degree, like you mentioned, they haven't won Worlds since 2016. Like, to what degree is coaching and all the extra responsibilities being put on Faker, weighing him down, right? It's not apparent in his gameplay itself, but just the little things, but just the mental stress of having basically the whole organization on his shoulders.
I mean, I'd argue that's what's earning him some of that money, though, because he's certainly not fucking killing the CS count every game or just fucking solo killing people, is he? So that I'd even say that in some ways maybe that's extended his career. That's why these last couple of years you couldn't let him go. Then the team, competitively, might have collapsed.
I was going to say, I think he takes those roles. He definitely takes them upon himself, and that's one of the things that people would quote him as being such an amazing player for all these years, is that he wants to have those pressure put on him, and he wants to be the one making those shots or doing the coaching for a lot of his teammates. He's been there for so long. He's played so many games. He feels like he probably knows better than anybody you're going to bring in anyway.
It's why it's hilarious. Everyone really did try to force the same narrative to Bjergsen. Meanwhile, it doesn't make any sense at all in the context of his career. And the entire thing a Bjergsen fan would say in theory is he's the best even when all his teammates let him down. It's like, but wait a minute, doesn't he also shot call and help them sum all up? No, yeah, but they all let him down. It's like, which is it, mate? Which is it? So the difference is, as far as I can tell, that is real. Faker does seem to do that.
No, but I will say from personal experience that, I went from just a bedroom musician to running my own business, and the amount of things I had to learn and the amount of basically it was a huge step, just having to learn all the legal side, the business side, and a large part of doing that successfully, which took me a couple of years to learn, was which tasks to delegate. And I'm not too sure on the structure of T1's coaching staff. I know Pult was there as basically, a figurehead and just kind of a managerial type. But I guess I'm saying that, if it depends on how much of a role the strategic coaches and coaches, basically how much he's delegating to them, versus how much he's actually doing himself.
Okay. Next topic.
Going off from you got something? Go ahead. No, I already had one.
Yeah, I was gonna just ask about kind of I think it was Charles Barkley on Inside the NBA who started using this concept of a bus rider versus a bus driver. And obviously you've talked about primary carries versus supportive people a lot in your work, Thorin. But I was thinking about it more and more and trying to look at some LCS and LEC people and whatnot. And I think that I was looking into a lot of Jensen stuff because obviously he's having this really great year where he was cast aside and now is obviously on the championship team. And I really feel that one of the really interesting things that in the last 5 or 6 years that's really starting to allow Jensen to maybe even have already passed Bjergsen, but at a minimum, really make the conversation closer and closer for the general public, is the fact that he has done a much better job of transitioning into a secondary carry or even non-carry, just not going to lose the game and going to allow his teammates to play the game role. Because obviously, that's been talked about a lot. Bjergsen is doing this coaching stuff, but the reality is he's just not at a level right now where it seems like he can 1v9 carry or anything. And because he can't do that and is still trying to sort of manipulate his teammates, that's causing them problems in theory. Whereas you never hear about Jensen teams playing around him, but he's just so good at filling a role and, I guess not taking space or resources from those other players, which to me is so drastically different than his early, first 3 or 4 seasons where he was just absolutely bodying everyone, get on my back, the world's running and whatnot. And I kind of just want to talk about that and get people's thoughts on that and how cool it is that Jensen has gone from this just 1v9 best mechanical player in the entire league, so on and so forth, to a guy who can be on championship teams as their second or third threat and not warp the team around him in a negative way.
Well, I'd say that that's almost a natural progression, right? Because your alternative is go out of the league, right? So, I mean, I'm trying to think of...
Or it's to be the best still.
Yeah, exactly, right? So you either have to, make the adjustments, or I'm trying to think of like a counter example mid laner where...
Rookie.
But he's still having success, albeit not at the Worlds level. But I guess in terms of a player...
Like one season.
Well, actually, I didn't watch LPL. Does Rookie... give more gold share to his teammates nowadays?
Rookie's probably still the best mid laner.
And the star, like he's the focus of the team.
And has been like from the second he landed in China until today.
Yeah.
But that's why he's the outlier. No one else could do that probably.
Well, and I guess what I'm trying to say partially is that the problem with other mid laners, and maybe the problem with Bjergsen, because there could be a lot of things there, is that like these players seem to continue to insist upon having themselves be like the main carry, or at a minimum have the game heavily played around them, whether that's like jungle presence or resources or whatever. And obviously it's just not working, because if you are going to be a primary carry and you're not the best, second best, so on and so forth in the league, that's not only going to just fail because you're losing to the other mid or whatever, but now someone on your team who might have had a chance to carry would be failing. And I guess part of why I was thinking about this is because obviously, at the beginning of the year, when you look at the Team Liquid roster, you're like, oh my God, they should, stomp people at a minimum. They should be top 3. They've got Han Sama, they've got Whippo, they've got Core JJ, so on and so forth. But obviously, Core JJ and Han Sama looked like dog shit, like the entire split. And maybe it's just possible that the skill vampires came and they just got worse or something changed. But based on the, kind of stuff that's being posted right now in terms of like disagreements over how to play the game and so on and so forth between Core and Bjergsen, I think there has to be something said about that, where it's like, okay, is it because Bjergsen is still trying to act like he's Bjergsen from, the first few seasons where he was just body?
Put it this way, I think it's really convenient that of the 3 players, Bjergsen, Jensen and Doublelift, all the ones that are basically, they're the 3 that you'd be talking about, the GOAT of LCS, like the ones you'd pick first in your draft to start a team at the LCS and build around. Here's what's funny. The one that gets all the props for being the best guy and the greatest fucking help to the teammate, and no one has anything bad to say, and he's the shot caller and the leader and the fucking avatar of the Maitreya in the world who will bring the universal light to the fucking human race. It's fucking Bjergsen. Meanwhile, here's the difference, right? Tons of teams Bjergsen can be good in, but they lose. It's not his fault. He can be all right in as a sportive player, and maybe sometimes they win by a margin, maybe they don't. And then what happens is the other 2, who are supposed to be dickhead, arseholes, arrogant, nothing like Bjergsen, don't ever praise them. You can build any type of team around them, and they're always really good, and the team's really good. Just funny how that works, isn't it?
Well, I guess earlier you alluded to, the concept of Jensen having to carry and be the main carry. If I remember correctly, he locked in, I don't remember the exact champion, but in the last game of
Zillion.
It was kind of, or was that the Zillion game where the last game they lost?
No, that was the last game they won. Like, come on, man. What does that mean? What do you mean last game they lost?
I'm trying to remember I don't remember.
They won the championship. So what season are we talking about? What split are we talking about? What are we talking about?
All right, just negate my point. I'm clearly not making sense.
What was the premise, though?
There was something that I had seen in one of the playoff games where it made me think that he had lost his killer instinct.
Listen, there was a lot of playoff games. Remember, you play all those series. So can you give us more context?
I believe it was actually the Zillion pick, where it is his signature champion, but in the current meta of things, I didn't really see that as a pick of like commanding the game, where basically it's this.
By definition, you're not trying to carry the game if you pick Zillion. You are trying to support the rest of your team.
Exactly. So
is the point that you don't think he's a carry? I don't get what the angle is.
Well, no, I read into that like essentially the killer instinct of like stomping the other team, right? I don't feel like that goes with Zillion. I don't think that and Zillion add up like together.
What? No, but here's what I don't get. Like, okay, we've taken that point, but what does that connect to? Like, what is the implication? Therefore? So since that's not like a killer instinct, what's the conclusion?
Oh no, I guess there was a question earlier, basically about like how Bjergsen, if he was taking too much of basically still trying to be the hard carry, if he, possibly could.
Wait a minute, have you just confused Bjergsen and Jensen? By the way, did you just keep saying Jensen when you meant Bjergsen? Because Bjergsen lost on Zillion. Yeah, you said Jensen the whole time. Am I wrong? Am I wrong here, guys?
That's exactly what I was thinking was happening.
Now I know what happened.
Okay, I'm sorry.
I was like, what are we talking about?
Right, because the other thing is, you also, it sounded like you were actually trying to like make the original guy's point, Paul's, but then disagree with it. But essentially, you agree with it, but just via alternative route. Like you're echoing his point that Bjergsen sort of went out on Zillion and showed that he wasn't like Michael Jordan, like, give me the last shot. He was like, you can take the shot. Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Yes, we got there in the end.
Am I misremembering? I thought Bjergsen did not pick Zillion in the last game that he lost in playoffs.
He didn't. I think we confused the two. He could have, is the point. In that one, it's like it was available, but he didn't. So actually, here's the one thing I'll say, right? I'm really good at spotting when people are sort of getting a bit lost. What I'll say is this, Kevin. These shows work best if we all just talk about what we know. So let's not talk about things like I half remember seeing a headline once. So like we're going to get really lost in the weeds if we do that. Let's all talk about what we know. Then we'll all be on track. We'll just make our points and let the convo go from there. Yeah. Is there anything else on this one, by the way? Because I would say my general point is I somewhat agree. I also think, by the way, this particular split, it's because it's his first split back. Like, actually, the obvious player that was playing really well is Berserker. You'd almost be a fool not to let him get all the picks and play around him and basically even sometimes play a Zillion to revive him or to get revived Blabber or something. I think you'd almost be a fool not to do that. I think that would be actually quite stubborn, which is why when Bjergsen did it, it's not that I have a problem with him playing supportive. I just have a problem with you getting paid all the money in the world to play supportive and then we all lose. That's the part I can't handle.
In that regard,
for me, essentially, Bjergsen should, once he realised Hansama was whack, have said, well, you know what, Steve, I can't promise that the team's going to work, but I'm going to carry the fuck out of these mid lane games, right? And I lock in fucking Silas,
Yeah, I was actually going to make a point real quick on that too. I think a lot of it also has to do with the fact that it is LCS and not LPL, LCK, because a lot of mid laners, like you mentioned, Rookie being the exact opposite, but also in the LPL, even the lower tier mid laners are coming for your throat. Like they really are going after it. And as much as I like the LCS, I have to say that a lot more of the top tier, Jensen, Bjergsen, and even Jojo Pion this year, they don't play a nearly as impactful role as a lot of the LPL mid laners. They do. Sure. They do tend to play the map in a sense of like they're trying not to look bad. And it's actually a point I wanted to bring up is I wonder why Jizuke is not in the league anymore, because people quoted it as him always inting or always running down these games, but he got third place just like EG did when he was doing that. And one of the things I loved about Jizuke is he actually took the game into his own hands. He said, int it or win it, I'm going hard. And that's enjoyable to watch, whether or not even if he ints 30 times in the game, it's enjoyable to watch. He's going after it. At least he's trying. Whereas I can give Jensen the break because it is his first season back and he had Berserker. But with Bjergsen, I was just disappointed in general by his champion picks. I wanted to see carry Bjergsen. That was the whole point of you coming back to play, right? You thought you could win. Let me see carry Bjergsen. Let me see, like you said, where's that bloodlust? Where's the anger? It just doesn't seem to be
to
there.
Bring it all back to my earlier topic. It was the Galio pick that, he doesn't have that in him.
There you go. That was the game 5 pick. Yes.
He doesn't. I don't like that. That pick just says, I can't carry anymore. Like that's what it says to me. Like,
the other thing I will say, though, is the LCS part of this discussion also skews it completely. Like, for example, one of the reasons why you notice a constant topic people swirl around on talk shows is that there is not a real culture of critique within NA teams and among players. So as a result, there's a notion, and I know it'll sound mad, but like, we are all equal. We are all equally good. Whoever gets the carry champion should be the one who carry. And like, obviously, you wouldn't do that in a real pro team. Like, you do a sort of triage, wouldn't you? You'd be like, right, sorry, Flackhead, on this team, you're not going to be the one who's on the carry champion this game. Caps and Broken Blade are getting their picks. You're going to be the weak side, and we're going to figure it out from there. But in this scenario, it's like, if he went like, but we could draft Zeri, and you were like, actually, yes, everyone is equal. So you know what? I wouldn't want to be rude and say I'm going to carry. So yes, let's play protect the flak. You know, that's in NA they would do that, mate. In fact, the joke is that's what they did for Hansara in that last game. They were like, let's protect a broken Jinx. By the way, not a good broke, like a champion that no one even picks anymore. They tried to play like a protect comp around it and got their head smashed in because he wasn't a carry.
I want to really quickly relate this to your native CSGO, Thorin. I know that there are 5 positions in League of Legends, but how come in the LCS, it seems like you said that they don't want to play the 5 positions as they are intended? There's an ADC. I mean, top lane you could say is not a tank always, but generally top lane's a tank. You have your mid laner who's going to be your AP carry. You have your jungler who's going to be also supportive. And you have your support who's probably going to be, you know, either he's an enchanter or he's an engaging support. In CSGO, they have very defined roles. They have their entry fragger. This is, again, I don't know a ton, so I'm going to be a little bit maybe wrong here, but they have the entry guy, they have the opper, they have your riflers who are kind of like the mid-range, the backup, and they're in front of the opper, give the opper the chance to line up and hit the shots. The entry guy to go in, scope out the site, do what he needs to do, see the guys, maybe get a frag there, and let everyone know what's going on. In the LCS, it seems like you said, they just kind of all, well, if we get the champ, if it's the right meta, we can kind of do this. Why isn't there any defined roles? Why don't we actually play the roles that we are assigned, that we're paid millions of dollars to play? I never understood that.
I mean, I will say in CS, it's not really as defined as that. As in, it's more like that's like the general category and tendency of what you do in the game. Like, for example, if we're spread out on the T side of the map and I'm like the guy who would be the entry coming out of the apartments on Inferno, if you get a pick on B, you're not saying, right, everyone stop, wait for him to come all the way around so you can go in for whoever's at B, just being the entry at that point in time. And suddenly I might be the lurker watching the flank where I was the entry otherwise. So it's not quite as simple as that. But yes, as general tendencies, you sort of have positions. So what I would say in general is, I think it's LCS that's skewing it again. This is the reason why you'll notice I've been making points on shows that while I actually think a take I hate is that Impact's like the greatest top laner. Like, I don't think he can be if you play weak side most of the time by definition, but he is the player I would have signed for the whole 10 years. And the reason why is because the ultimate formula in NA basically is the formula that Misfits and 100 Thieves figured out this split. You have a tank top laner, a tanky fucking jungler, you have like a carry mid laner of some type, you have a carry AD carry, probably hyper carry, hopefully you're going to scale, and then you have something like an enchanter or an engage support, and you play 5v5s and you play front to back, and it's the most basic version of League of Legends possible. It's the simplest to coach, everyone knows their roles, it's very telegraphed, and then it's just about play out the fights. It's one of the reasons why I actually think everyone defaults to that in NA. I don't think it's that they're stupid or that no one can play differently. Half the players come from other leagues. I think it's that when you want to keep your job and things are difficult because you can't really have proper discussions in practice, and basically you're having problems, you want a band-aid, why not go to the simplest form of League of Legends that exists and play it out? And so that's why having Impact will always be brilliant, because you just get a really good mid and ADC, boom, you've got a team already.
I think that's why Odawanda is going to be such a desirable candidate this year, because his contract's ending as well, and I feel like any team in the LEC or LCS should be like, that dude's the Rock, that dude's the other Impact to a certain extent, especially now that obviously he's gotten the title too, and shown that like it's not a choking thing necessarily.
Sure.
But I also I think that's just more so to LCS culture, the way they play, in that just based on looking at the successful teams over the years, like with Double Lift, etc. Like if you're an LCS GM, I guess, you know, that's kind of just what you've been trained to do, right? Like, is like, are there any teams in LCS that have tried to adapt a more Korean or Asian style?
Oh, people have tried it. It's just whether or not it works. Like, for example, the problem is some of them are scuffed. Like, in my opinion, the team where they had Alfari and Jensen would have been like a European team. They would have fucking run game through the solo lanes. The problem is they had that stupid shit where Santorin didn't even play for the majority of the regular split. Then I had to go and get their motherfucking coach fired so they'd have a chance. They still made the finals and made it to Worlds and almost made top 8. Like, I'd say that's a great example of one. It's why, if you notice, go back and check the shows. Everyone else said Team Liquid has no chance to get out of that Group D. And I was the whole time like, they might not be favourites, but of course they have a chance. Like, they can mix it up with Mad Lion Lions. They can mix it up with these fucking team. Even Gen G wouldn't be unbeatable if you have the players they had. Remember, one of Gen G's problems was the fucking top lane. Like, to me, I actually thought that was an example of a squad that could have worked. The sad thing about this year, by the way, is, look, Hans Sama, if you don't know, he doesn't have to be played around like Uzi I. He can also be like a semi-weak side player if you want. He's got the personality for it even. If Bjergsen had been a hard carry, this is one of the reasons I would keep Whippo now. Because everyone else just runs like veteran tank top laners, anytime it's a carry meta, I want to like Whippo. I just play through him and fuck up the lane. Alfari was doing great. Don't listen to anyone who tells you he was trash in LCS. He used to be amazing in lane. And then what he would do is, in the team fights, half the time, they just let him fucking die. They wouldn't even follow up when he went in on a Gnar or a fucking Renekton. Like, they would just watch him get murked because they just had a terrible team spirit. Because, spoiler, they didn't have a coach. Like, I actually think those are examples of teams that have worked. I mean, people would even argue most of the Shizuke teams, he tried to, like, split push half the game. It's been tried. It's just I think it's more difficult to pull off. So people just think, fuck it.
I truly hope that if this thing that you and Monty and other people have been talking about, where the minor regions will become not considered imports anymore, that we can get full import minor region teams into the league and actually maybe become an LPL light in a sense. Because I think the biggest problem of the LCS is actually that they try to be like whatever the best region is, but they're just really bad at it. And they end up either ignoring the side lanes or ignoring the key points that make certain teams work together. Like, I think it was the one game where they were using Nocturne and Kennen, I believe, and it was C9 and Fudge. And the one thing they couldn't quite get right was how to mask the Kennen's entry with the Nocturne ult. And it seems simple, but it's one of those things, if you don't do right, Kennen is just going to get exploded as soon as he comes in from the flank. It's not easy to do like it makes like the LPL team seem like it is. They do it so much and they're so aggressive with it, and they practice it so much that it looks easy, but actually in practice, it might not be that easy, especially when LCS teams are not positioning correctly anyway. It's hard to like pull off a complicated dive or complicated maneuver when the other team is not even set up in a way that makes any sense. They might have 3 guys in that bush where there shouldn't be for any real reason at all, but because it's the LCS, they're all just there for some reason.
Fair enough.
Hypothetical. And this is all, is River considered an LCS or an NA resident?
No, he's fucking Korean, isn't he?
Yeah, but he's been in the league since how many?
Not very long.
Yeah, I think he's been 3 splits in the league.
First of all, there's nothing about
Yeah.
splits. You have to get an American green card, and spoiler, they're not giving those out easily now.
Nah.
And also, remember, he's only been in a couple of years. Like, I'd say, like a year and a half? It might even just be this year.
I thought it was this year.
I think it's just this year, because he was on like a fucking... Wasn't he on like the PCS team last year?
Yeah.
Because I was just hypothetically like Kanavi. Basically, I was just making a Korean super team on Golden Guardians, but they would have to basically reverse their GMing philosophy to do that.
And Thorin, you mentioned too before about keeping Whippo on TL. I have a question for you. Do you think it would be better to import specifically a mid-jungle duo from a strong region like either LCL, LCK, or LPL, and maybe try to get impact if they can? I don't know if EG's ever going to let him go or how long his contract is, but instead of keeping Whippo, because I don't think Whippo did anything wrong this season at all. I think he was one of the best parts of TL, but I think because of how bad Bjergsen and Centaurin's synergy kind of were, I wonder if it would just not be better to just import 2 mid and jungle from the same region and just kind of build the team around that instead of trying to take a amalgamation of many different teams just because they are really good players.
The obvious one to me would be skip the fucking Asia region. Why not get an LEC mid-duo? Why not just get someone who already works?
I would.
Wouldn't they run? And they speak English. They're going to run rampage over the league. No one's ever tried that, by the way, ever in history. You'll go and look. No one's ever just taken an amazing mid-duo duo and convinced them both to come at the same time. Who knows why? It's basically because the spoiler, like I said earlier, LCS really thinks the game is 5v5 team fights. As Europe has shown, whether it's right or not, Europe is going to be jungle mid until the end of fucking time. Like, the joke in the finals of LEC is absolutely Malrang and Larsen outperformed Caps and Yankos. That was a big part of why the game went the way it did. Like, if you are the best jungle mid duo, you pretty much do win the LEC. So I've never understood why LCS never embraced that. Like, if you're going to bring over a Febiven, get a jungler he can work with. If you're going to bring, like, why have you never gone to one of the mid-table teams that had the pop-off and brought those two? I don't know, mate.
I think it's maybe slightly now, not before, but now it's because it's hard to get a lot of the LEC players to come over to LCS now. I wouldn't want to if I were them, to be completely honest, unless they're...
It's only if they're the best that they won't come now, mate. And the problem with that was a lot of them already wouldn't anyway. It's more like the ones who won't come are the ones who can guaranteed get a top 3 spot. Even though there's no such thing as a guaranteed top, but the G2, the Fnatic spot, or maybe like a Mad Lions spot. I don't even know about Mad Lions because the money's not that great. So I would say if you wanted to actually go, you could absolutely have gotten some of the... Like, the joke right now is you could probably get Vethio tomorrow. The problem is he doesn't have a great jungler to have the synergy with, so that one doesn't work for that one. Like I'll give you an example. Here's what you do if you've got massive balls, if you're Team Liquid. Go and try and sign Markoon and Nukedoc. It's not like the greatest sign of all time, it's a jungle mid duo.
And they'd probably, like you said, run table on a lot of LCS teams.
They'd be pretty good, right?
And
You'd
both
think.
of their contracts are up.
You'd think they'd be pretty good, and there's no way Excel's paying them like, the moon. Like, they're just getting okay amounts, I'm sure.
Or what if they just get Vethio to join EG? I mean, I think that'd be a pretty spicy combination right there.
Problem there is they've committed their own ego to the idea that JoJo was made by them. They don't say that, but let's face it, it's implied. So the thing with that is, like, it's going to be hard to reverse course and bench him, innit?
This off season's kind of crazy for like LEC and LCS because Oda Wamne, Someday, and Impact, all of their contracts end this summer.
But the thing is, though, remember, there's a plot element that people are forgetting with Rogue, which is because they're getting those coy people to buy a percentage of the spot, and then they're just keeping, like, the minor percentage, and then the coy people presumably will come in with whatever bankroll they have. I would imagine, logically, that they just mega pay whoever, like people like Odoame, and he just stays. And here's the other thing. If you look at his role within the team, if he gets mega paid, maybe he does just stay. Because another thing with a guy like that, it's a bit like why I think Upset's never gone to LCS. When there were seasons when you would have gone, when you were like a Schalke player, but they didn't give you the good enough offer, then when they come back later, you can be petty a little bit and be like, fuck you. You didn't want me before. Well, now I'm the shit. I'm not going. So, like, and also, Odoame is one of those guys who it isn't about the money. He really wants the championships.
In European Masters things like LFL, etc., I assume they wouldn't speak English, right? They'd most likely be speaking their...
Almost everyone in Europe will speak some form of English, mate. Way better than a Korean, for example.
So in the case of an LCS team, would it not be better to, or at least cheaper, not necessarily better, but to go for something like an LFL jungle mid duo?
Yeah, of course. But the problem there is, did you spend the last 3 years scouting the LFL? If you didn't, you're in deep shit because everyone in Europe did. So they're going to get the players. They might even have the connections. Remember, a detail a lot of people forget is maybe a guy who's on your LEC team coached one of those guys when he was in the ARLs. There's so many connections. So the problem is, I would have done that 5 years ago. And I told my friends in LCS, do that 5 years ago. But instead they didn't. And so they allowed Larsen and Humanoid and Aberdeen. By the way, these guys weren't going to top teams. These guys were going to nobody teams. People forget how shit Rogue was when Larsen joined. Like, they were one of the worst teams in the league. But they didn't sign these people. But what they want to do now, when we've actually milked some of the greatest talents from that scene and replaced vets, is now they want to come and go, can I get on the gold rush? What's this, like Bitcoin? What can I buy it for? Like, it's like, fucking hell, you're late, mate.
It feels like they
Shout
don't
out
want
to
to
50K
take
buyers everywhere.
Say that again.
I said it feels like they don't want to take chances. They're just too afraid.
No, the joke is they think money means you can guarantee success. Well, Steve Arhan said, does it? Like, there's a great saying. It was said by one of the most legendary players and coaches in European soccer history, a guy called Johan Cruyff. He said, I've never seen a bag of money score a goal.
Well, it can buy you short-term market share. That's for sure.
No, because that isn't a goal, is it? That's market share. So you've just fucking cheated there, haven't you?
Do you fault him for that, Thorin? Because I know previously you've talked about how, like, you appreciated that Steve is always willing to try and make an upgrade, even if he already has a good team. Like, do you like seeing how colossally small failed feel like, yeah, he clearly was just an idiot, or do you still feel
No,
like,
I have the opposite take to everyone else. I think his stupid moves now to say that super teams failed, he's not going to do it anymore. That sounds to me, by the way, like he might have got his body smacked because he promised all those investors that he was making the God team that'd definitely make Worlds like he always did every other season, and that they'd be at Worlds in NA. And I think what's happened is he's probably had to go back, and they've gone like, yeah, we're going to like tighten up the purse strings for next year. So like a true managerial class figure, he's coming out going, well, I've decided maybe it's time to promote my academy. But shut the fuck up. No, you didn't. Like, wow, nobody in the universe went like, oh, JJ, I think I'd rather have that guy for my academy team. Like, that just sounds like you don't have the position to make these super team signings, which is sad, because the flaw wasn't the super team signings. That's why we're all so hyped and so confused it didn't work. It's that you've signed the wrong players in the wrong years with the wrong fucking synergies and the wrong aspects. And so, yeah, that's what seems to have fucked you. But that seems rather, I almost think there's an arrogance to that, to be like, no, it wasn't my signings that failed. It's super teams fundamentally fail. Like, bro, you could have had the one that worked if you'd done it right. I mean, I'll say it right now. Everyone ignores it. If he'd have just actually stuck with the Jensen one, or there was even the alternative that Jensen would have role swapped to ADC and have Jensen and Bjergsen, those already sound like interesting prospects. Like, well, I'd run that back if I could do that now, sort of.
It just sounds like a bunch of Bjergsen copium. I think if Team Liquid had like a superstar Europe mid or something, they'd probably be in Worlds.
Exactly. If you could have taken Jensen, who played at Worlds, and just had him come into LCS with a super team, like, mate, I absolutely think EG's under threat, under the Thieves under threat. That'd be a pretty interesting year. I'd like to run that back if I could.
And I do think, like you said, Matt, a lot of it is just that Bjergsen failed, right? If Bjergsen played half as good as well, I shouldn't say half as good. If Bjergsen played like Bjergsen of old, where he's carrying games.
The thing is that Bjergsen of old is like season 5. Like, he was playing Maokai shit like 2 seasons ago.
It was still good, though. You have to, like, for example, the split that they won, the online one in season 10, he was still carried in the playoffs. Like, he's the reason they won the playoffs. Like, they would have gone out in like fucking 5th or 6th or something if it was up to double lifting them. So, like, he's still a good player. The problem is, when he's the faker of NA, yeah, that's like till like, let's say like season 7 or something. Like, after that, you start having splits where it's a bit of a drop off, or he's just one of the best, but not like the clear faker guy above all. The joke is, that's almost why you cursed him calling him the faker of NA. Yeah, he dropped off right about the time good old faker did. You know?
Also
and
brings back
point,
the earlier point where like Bjergsen doesn't seem to be playing the support role very well. Like, he's still bringing the team around even though he's playing the support champ. I don't think he's playing the support champ, but he's not playing it right when he does that.
Other than Zillion, if you get him on the Zillion, then he plays it amazingly. But yeah, the other ones, Galio, because Galio's hard. I mean, it's not like you see a ton of Galios being played around the world now. It's a hard champion to play mid. It's very much one that you have to rely on your top lane most of the time with a Camille, or your jungler with, if they run Jarvan. Something has to be there to set the Galio up to get the big ultimates. Otherwise, you're pressing R on a guy and they just walk away from you. It's really hard champion to do that.
To me, that was arrogance as well, playing that champion, because it's like, bro, of all the players who haven't shown me in the last few years they have a really strong understanding of macro, you're going to try and essentially directly compare yourself to Xiaohu, who I just saw win MSI on that champion, playing the whole fucking map, like downloading the opponent. Like, you just make yourself look like a fool.
Yeah,
it didn't even hide him. It made him look silly.
And hasn't Xiaohu not been playing Galio since MSI, really? I mean, maybe on the odd game, but he's not spamming it.
I mean, even then, he was just playing it for a reason, wasn't he? He wasn't playing it because he was the best champion or anything.
Yeah, and
that really is
amazing on it too. He's really good at Galio. It's one of his signature champs. It's I don't know. It's odd.
If Liquid keep this core into next year with
what do you mean core?
What is the core?
Well,
the irony is they're probably not going to keep the player called core. That's the joke. Yes. But if they put it this way, it's implied they're going to keep Bjergsen. I imagine Thorin because he's an NA resident. And then it sounds like Hans Sama's going back to Europe, remember? He might replace Reckless on K-Corp or whatever. And then who knows about Bwipo. So maybe they keep like Thorin, Bwipo, and Bjergsen. So maybe it's just a bot lane swap, which is why they're implying the Academy one. That sounds like the core they think they're keeping.
What's the hard on from Bjergsen?
Well, because the thing is, I guess, if next year they fail again, how many years of this experiment do they try before maybe dialing it back a bit and attempting something like 100 Thieves or Cloud9?
Well, part of it could be Bjergsen's contract too. Did they sign? They signed him for 3 years. How long? I don't remember the exact details of his contract when they came out, but I'm sure Steve doesn't want to just give him up right away without him doing something.
His contract ends next year.
Next year? Ah, okay.
Mm-hmm.
So they have another year. But basically, if they fail again next year, like, do they try? I hate to.
It's almost certain that they will not be running back the same 5 players. That is almost certain. As in the next year, it's over. This 5 players will probably never play again.
And I think rightfully so. There's no way that they should keep the same core, even though I don't think any of the players are bad. I just think that together this team is just not working. Who knows if putting in a rookie ADC from academy leagues is just going to be what they need to pump the team up. I think they should keep core too, but changing something has to happen. There's just no way the same 5 players stay together.
Well, earlier you mentioned now it'd be very difficult to. Oh, sorry, Thorin. Earlier you mentioned it would be very difficult to acquire LFL talent due to a number of different reasons.
I just don't think you'd know who to sign, mate, for a start off.
Well, sorry, I just lost my point.
Just circle back. Think about what you was talking about before. Something about signing jungle mid duo from LFL. What would the context be for Team Liquid?
Yeah, basically, is that what would be the like? Let's say Steve takes a step back from GMing. How difficult would it?
Apparently, he is doing that. Have you seen the story?
No.
As far as I know, I think there was a story that implied, like, didn't it imply that, like, Papa Smithy or something would be joining Team Liquid? I think that was actually, like, implied in a story.
Oh, that was actually, I was going to, that was my question, was how much money would it take for them to acquire, like, an LEC GM or a Papa Smithy?
Well, the other thing to remember is, in theory, Deficio's available. There's one for you. Seems to have done an amazing job. If you don't know, he was working with like 8th or 9th budgets at times of some of these squads. So any of these guys would be amazing. The problem is when you said earlier, like, take like the 100 Thieves approach. Spoiler, Papa Smithy is like a fucking alchemist, mate, who took straw and turned it into gold. Like, in the limited budget he was working with, everyone's going to say stupid shit because people just repeat things on Reddit. Like, 100 Thieves have loads of money because they sell lots of sweaters. It's like, actually, they had a limited budget. And I know Papa Smithy had like only certain roles he could pick people in. And even then he had to, like, if he got someone here, he had to make a concession elsewhere. That's why he had to stick with the Rioma guy for that much time. That's why he had to wait for, who was it, fucking Someday to get the green card. Like, people forget, he didn't win in a year. Didn't he do something like, wasn't it like his second year or something? He finally got the success at the very end as like out of fluke out of nowhere in the playoffs. And that was mainly because of the Abedage trade working out. And then FBI, who was a gamble, genuinely turning out to be really good. So I think there was a lot of luck, and he wasn't working with the same expectations, the same budget. He wouldn't be fired if he came second or third. Thing is, if you join the TL gig, that is like the top gig. So you absolutely better be the shit.
Yeah, I was going to mention that too.
The fans not being down with like a year or two of losing, even if they were to win like 4 or 5 years in a row, they'd probably just, I don't know if the reputational tank would be worth it for them. It's an interesting conversation.
I'd also say, a bit like in CSGO, I think part of the reason people go so hard on G2's new in-game leader has nothing to do with him. It's because it's just been too long since they won championships. So that feeling just is like a pressure cooker building up. And whoever's new, you just inherit the other guy's failures in a way. So the problem Team Liquid has for me is they had the dynasty of the 4 titles. Then every year they have on paper a kind of super team, but something goes wrong. Doublelift fucks off. Then you have the thing with fucking, what was it, Santorin, and then you have all the shit goes down with Jat, and then this year you have all the fucking bollocks with the lineup not working, and it's like, it's been so many years now that if you're a fan, it's like, look, unless you win next split, like I'm basically hate you in a fucked up kind of sense.
Yeah, like you said though, it's winning is what makes these teams, these organizations really big. People care more about the winning than they do about almost anything else. That actually brings me to a point that I had a little bit earlier that I forgot. How come, and I know it's been said before, how come the only thing we know about some of these players, like I'm going to pick Jojo Pion, is that he played Fortnite before? I remember way back in the early days of LCS, and when it was EU LCS, it was all about the players, and they would shove the players in front of the camera. We would have these long segments on the broadcast telling you about where they came from, telling you about who these players were, getting you to know them, and like that way, in a sense, even though they lost, you were fans of, like, let's say Dignitas, or you were fans of Curse back in the day because they had interesting players on them and you cared about the players. You liked Skara, you liked Cutie Pie. Like, where has this gone? Why is this no longer a thing?
By any chance, do you have you ever been interested in professional wrestling?
Never. I
Okay.
haven't really watched wrestling.
I preface that because there's something occurred basically in the professional wrestling business where the business philosophy of WWE changed to where the company itself would be the largest star, and they didn't want to raise a wrestler to a status of like a John Cena or The Rock, or like basically like a cultural phenomena, like a Hulk Hogan or something, because they didn't want the company itself to be outshined. There may be a similar thing in League of Legends where the focus of Riot Games is mostly on, you know, the brand.
I think it always was, mate. Like, basically, the spoiler to that question is nearly every player you're talking about probably played in the open season and the first seasons of LCS, where they were massive streamers. There was way less players, way less streamers back then. So if you were one of the big 10 in NA, like that's why people still know who Scar is today. Like, just because of that early, it's not like he won fucking LCS or anything, mate. He wasn't some top player in LCS, but in season 2 he was big. Then he had the carryover. He kept streaming for a number of years. He'd already had the personality built up. I also think that in itself builds personality. If you just sit in a fucking practice room and then an LCS studio, what personality are you developing? Who are you? You're just a boring fuck. That may as well be an office job, mate. You're not pushing a pencil. You're just clicking buttons. Like, what would be interesting about your life? One of the reasons why I Will Dominate and Skara and I'm a Cutie Pie are so interesting is because you didn't have to be as professional, because they were traveling around the world. Because I'll tell you what, they were all fucking fangirls and all sorts of crazy shit was going on at some of those events. And they were in Korea, and then they were in Europe, and then they were in North America, and then they were at some event you went out early and you all got pissed drunk and had a bender. Then you were at some event and you won the championship, and they had life experiences. I think in the modern day, someone like Jojo, he may as well be like a fucking create your own character out like FIFA or something. Who is this guy? Just a guy with he's just a guy with 7 out of 10 skills, like mechanically mid laning, and he plays on these, like, who gives a shit? Like, that's the joke. The fact he played Fortnite is the most interesting thing about him. And the joke with him is he's even spamming like fucking generic wrestling level trash talk. It just doesn't work. Like, I know some people like it, but to me, I always thought this. The only reason Doublelift trash talk is fire is because Doublelift is fire. It's not because he just says everyone's shit. Like, guess what? In the seasons when Doublelift wasn't good, that looked really silly and actually sort of made you think, fuck this guy. It was only because he was the best that he could trash talk like that. And also, spoiler, I secretly think Doublelift did it to keep himself motivated in splits when he was just phoning it in, and he had to sort of find a way to pick on the new ADC to get himself roused up. It's like, I better fucking beat this guy in the playoffs now. Like, I think there was some of that as well. So to me, even his trash talk shows, it's not as simple as just scripting it. You can't just do it that way. Like, if you just keep saying, I will clap, fake it, it's like, okay, I mean, whatever, anyone could say it, mate, you know?
Maybe I remember it differently, but I honestly don't. Even when like Cutie Pie was like one of the biggest streamers in the world, Dignitas was never one of the top 2 most popular teams. Like, in the old days, it was 100% TSM and CLG for an extended period of time. Like, there weren't a ton of Curse fans, and Team Liquid didn't start being one of the top 2 or 3 teams until they started winning. Kind of the same deal with Cloud9, but obviously Cloud9 came in right off the top and started winning. But I don't think that was actually ever really the case. That anything but winning was what was determining what was getting fans invested for the most part. Like, I remember seeing some of those documentaries they do about like Dardoch and how hard his life was, or Bjergsen or whatever, but it seems like what was driving stardom was like either the personality of individual people like Doublelift, who were standouts, or the fact that those teams just won and they kept winning.
That's very true. But even back in those days, the early days, lower level teams were getting 50K plus viewers on their streams. Obviously, the landscape has changed a lot now that we don't have, I think, even that many watching LCS live broadcast anymore. But I wanted to go back to that point that you made before about Doublelift talking shit to people to kind of psych himself up. I've heard that's a lot of what professional fighters would do as well. Like Mike Tyson was kind of quoted as saying this, is that he would talk shit to his enemies to get himself ready to go into the ring. And one of the things that he would normally talk about is that before actually stepping into the ring or before a game night, he was terrified. But as he got closer and closer to the actual fight night, he would talk himself up more and more till he became a god, till he had this mentality to make himself into Iron Mike Tyson, into the persona that he had to have to actually go in there and perform into those fights. So Doublelift, not nearly as physical as Mike Tyson, but in the same way, is psyching himself up to at least get in there and shit on the lesser guys. I mean, that is interesting to me. That's probably a very similar mentality.
Probably the biggest like misunderstanding, I think, of competition is the way that every fan just seems to put a static label on someone. So, for example, if you're a champion like Bjergsen, you're a champion forever, right? Every single time you play, you must just be the most clutch, you're confident. No, like, I mean, recently Roger Federer retired. And if you ever go back, right, the last Grand Slam he won, I think this is the last one he won, was I think it was the Australian Open off the top of my head. And whichever one he won, in his speech winning his like 20th Grand Slam, he actually admitted that like every time he plays there, he's always nervous and he feels like he has to like deliver for the fans and he's worried that, you know, like he won't live. And it's like, mate, you're the guy who won the most ever at that point in time. But the point is, that's the part of greatness that people don't see. People always see what they think is the finished product. Like you're a champion, like, right, he's just a champion. So actually, basically, you could try like 50% as much next season. It's one of the main areas I notice in like the West. People don't understand what a craft is. Like the best example ever is, you know, when people will talk about like guys who are bad at free throws in basketball, right? Most of those guys for real aren't making it a primary focus. They're not actually trying to work on it. What they're even thinking is like, look, I'm just bad at free throws, so I can't get better. But think about this. So Steph Curry's the best 3-point shooter, and he almost certainly shoots the most 3-point shots in practice. He doesn't shoot less because he's amazing. He shoots more. He makes sure he's absolutely the best and maintains it. Now, he could obviously go on a drunken bender and still outshoot most people, but he probably wouldn't be the best year on year on year on year in that sense if he didn't make it his absolute single-minded craft. So I actually think a lot of people don't realise. It's why I do find people who win a lot of championships very interesting, because what it implies is you either have techniques like this to get yourself back into that mind state and again get the hunger and go for it, or you probably are some sort of fucked up like sociopath where maybe this is like the only outlet you have for some sort of pleasure or purpose in life, which by the way is one of the reasons why, while I like revere their work ethic, I actually wouldn't want to be any of these human beings, mate. Like people like Michael Jordan sound sad as fuck, mate. It actually sounds like one of the most lonely, pathetic lives ever, and you are still in your head living off the idea of like, fuck this young guy who's good now, I'd beat him. It's like, no, bloody hell, mate, you know, fucking hell. When does it ever kick in that you enjoy your life, you know?
Well, I mean, that level of competition, like I actually deal with that on a much smaller scale personally, just in terms of like operating as a business, like especially in like the music industry where everything, it's basically a really cutthroat. There's a lot of competition. And the option, knowing that like, you know, you could fail anytime it's difficult, but you know, there's obviously a lot of work to be done, and it's definitely stressful to say the least. And part of that is when you're so involved in the competition element, it seeps into other areas of your life where basically everything becomes a competition, and that can be really unhealthy, which is, you know, as what you alluded to with Michael Jordan.
And also kind of like what you were saying before, Thorin, like you said, I like to see what makes people champions, and not just champions, but multiple time champions, because I think you've done content on this before where you talked about you can have a guy who wins, but after that he's pretty satisfied with himself, with his life, and what he's accomplished. He's just like, oh, I've done it. This is the best for me now, and he kind of fades off into existence. But when you have guys like Michael Jordan, like Kobe, and you know, I'm even going to bring up what's the football player's name? The really great quarterback that has won more than any organization.
Oh, Tom Brady.
Tom Brady, yes, Tom Brady. When you have guys like that, it's definitely, like you said, there's a messed up mental attitude to them where they cannot just be happy with the fact that they've won any more than anyone else. They see one guy who looks like someone compares them to them or says they're almost as good as them, or maybe they're going to be like the next one of them. Their mind starts going, I'm going to beat that guy into the ground and show you that he will never be as good as me because there is no one as good as me. And that's a crazy mentality to have. And to the same point, there's a lot of sports that people would not watch, like wrestling, and I don't mean professional wrestling with Hulk Hogan in them. I mean wrestling, like college level wrestling, where that is like the entire sport, or even long distance running. There is no, there's no big accolades for it. There's people are going to notice you if you're maybe in the Olympics, but other than that, it's like just pain 24/7. And you see guys who are amazing at that, and they've got to have that same mentality too.
Here's the funny thing. That is what esports used to be, because there was no social status. There was no money, essentially. And basically, you were just a nerd in a room. But the point is, you're going to have to be the best nerd in that room. Like, it wasn't cool to come 8th in a tournament where they only pay out the top 3. That's probably the most whack thing about the modern day. We skipped the monetization phase and managed to already make our top pros like the idiot guy in the NBA who gets the max contract and then just fucks around, gets like a couple of all-star appearances and never tries for the championship because who gives a fuck? He's paid, right?
Yeah, basically it's been, like for example, my Counter-Strike Source experience, I played a lot in the Florida LAN scene. And even if the LAN center is all there, they had the computers, you didn't have to BYOC or anything. Even if you won the tournament, you were still out of pocket, and that's without having to lug your computer and all the other expenses. So yeah, there's definitely, it's all pride. I'm better than you, nerd.
And
you must know it.
That was going to be my tie-in to the esports part of it, is that I don't see a lot of that in the Western regions. I see it in the Eastern regions. Like, I just started really watching LPL this year, and it's insane to me to see the difference. It looks like I said before, they are all coming for your throat 24/7, regardless of what team they're on. There are a few teams that play more passive, but almost every single team is executing dives before 8 minutes. They're all going crazy. They're all after everyone's throat. Everyone's going hard. Everyone's looking to be the best player they can be. And when I look over at the LCS, we're playing Seraphine bot lanes, and we're just passively handshaking games and just spending a long time looking at each other, smiling, going, oh, eventually we'll fight, right? It's crazy. That's what it's become now.
I mean, I would say the high resolution sort of case that you would say would be, well, the best, like the big picture would basically be, look at Chinese culture, look at American culture. I don't even need to get into games. Like, you just see the trends, right?
Yes, very much so. Very much.
Like in China, I mean, in some cases, literally, they're climbing over each other to take the food out of another guy's mouth to put into theirs so they stay alive. In America, it's more like, but sort of comfortable, and this sucks, and I wish it was it's unfair, and like, mate, no one's got time for that in China, mate. You try doing that shit, they'll just boot you out the door.
Well, it seems weird though. Oh, sorry, I was gonna say it seems weird to me because, like, obviously in esports, North America has been behind for the longest time in games that aren't like Call of Duty or whatever. But then if you look at like sports culture, so to speak, in terms of like the Olympics, like the United States is one of the top 3 medal earners at the Olympics, and surely some of that's because of money, but like, how come those cultural differences aren't showing up in other competitive endeavors but are showing up in esports, which in theory should be, I suppose, more equalized?
I mean, I think the problem with all Olympic sports is probably the easiest to rig in the history of sports, so there is that. Then I'd add in, first of all, it's a bad topic to get into, because if you don't know politically, the UK does it as well, don't worry. They essentially like pay people to become American and British. Like, that is a real thing. You can look into it. It's been done many, many, many times. Also, when I started, as the right like grandparent or something, and you just get a guy who, by the way, like, there was a guy from like Africa or something who won some like mad medals for the UK the same way. Like, he had some vague relative that he could say, and he just became British. He was overnight christened as British. It actually even happened in tennis a couple of decades ago. There was a Canadian guy called Greg Grzeski. No, he represents Great Britain now because we didn't have many good players. So let's just pay this guy to become like the second best player in Britain or whatever. So there's that element. Then also, you are outspending the others by an ungodly amount. Then thirdly, you can literally use drugs to make the players better. Like, look, if you want to open up LCS and start experimenting on these motherfuckers, like, yeah, I could probably get you pretty far. Like, let's like start ripping out the adrenal glands, putting in like hyper fucking meth related shit. You could probably get them to be better than the Koreans. I don't really know that I'd want to go that approach. Like, again, if there's one type of athlete I would never want to be, it's a bloody Olympic athlete, mate. It seems like you actually are just like almost a fucking like a pure breed racehorse that's pumped full of drugs and just run until your body's bust.
Anything for the Summoners Cup, Thorin. Anything.
would be amazing if they added that in, though. In between rounds, they have a fist fight because they got to drag the roided.
That's why the biggest joke of all, like, here's what's funny. I could even counter your point, because if that was true that the USA is the best and they win, why did they have to go hard as fuck at the other massive countries that would beat them or be as good, seeing that they're the ones using the drugs? And by the way, they are. It's just they're not as good at not getting caught. Well, the joke is the USA gets to cheat and then say everyone else is a cheater, which is just also a metaphor for the USA and the world in general, innit?
Well, I think traditionally, like, I guess before all the big money and like the US having to basically buy their athletes, I think there's just a lot that comes with like the culture those athletes would have grown up in, especially for like an African American athlete in like the 60s or 70s, when basically the political climate was a lot about self-improvement in that community, and basically being the best self you can be and proving the outside world wrong. And that applied to sports is, like in the Tom Brady example, that's basically one of the ultimate motivators.
Do I have a topic pivot? Who hasn't asked one yet? Someone must not have. Did you have one, Matt?
Yeah, I'll head out here. So I was recently watching the Rogue Trimby set. So Trimby says he has like a huge champion pool. So I was wondering.
This is the G2 final, yeah?
Yeah. So I haven't watched this visit, but it was on champion pool. So if you have, like, what stops a team from taking like crazy risks on like taking champs that you don't see a lot, that you might have like surprise advantage? That a lot of like what LS brought to Cloud9 was like weird picks, but like he had the whole team around him. But I imagine that like teams aren't willing to play with other players' weird picks, and that's why we're stuck in like the same meta picks every time. But like, what does it take to get?
I think it's best of ones.
A weird one.
Personally, I think that's best of one, just because without the ability to play the best of 3 series and like maybe try something in one game, it basically almost like there's almost a forced conform, or like they're less likely to take risks because the outcomes of the fewer games are weighed more. Right, so it almost reinforces conformity to whatever people are doing in scrims just because you have a certain amount of time to practice in a week.
If I'm Oduam there and I've played for like 7 years and I'm trying to win the championship, and then you just come and play something I've never seen anyone play at support, and then you die and you fuck up the whole game and I don't even get to play out my laning phase, and I'm the veteran, I'm just going to tell you to stop that shit. Then there's the coach. I haven't planned for this. Like, does it even work? Have you got any proof? Have you played your 100 solo queue games? Then let's imagine the other scrim partner. Right, mate, we're misfits. We only just got a scrim with fucking G2. You pulled that shit out and failed the scrim. Now they're not going to get us any more. You see what I mean? There's a million factors that go against it, all of which are totally understandable from each person's POV. Wait there a second. Someone dropped. I think he wanted to ask the question and then head out. I think he meant. So, okay, fair enough.
Oh, sure.
Keep going then.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with that. Like, I was thinking about the scrim angle to it, where it's like the other teams, would they want to practice you if you're constantly doing things like that? I also think that obviously there's like not hundreds, but over 100 champions in the game, and it's just not. I guess it's just the case that a certain number of those champions fulfill a certain role the best in pretty much any given patch, right? Like, I don't know that there is, for what you want Sylas for, I just don't think there is any other champ in the meta that's better than Sylas. So why wouldn't you spend your time getting good at Sylas and so on and so forth? Right? Like, it just, I guess you could be really, like, do kind of a PoE type thing, or like a Bjergsen thing where, like, you have Zillion, or you have interesting builds and so on and so forth. But I don't know why that would be advantageous compared to, like, literally this champion's numbers or their kit or their synergies with the current meta is just statistically better. And so if you are the better player, like, why wouldn't you want as many advantages as you can?
Well, I think, like, for example, there was a Damwon Kia game, it may have been in the playoffs or in the regional qualifier, where they picked the Heimerdinger in the bottom lane. And basically they picked it with the Azir, and I guess the idea being to have, full control over choke points before an objective. And I can see those kind of niche picks working in those scenarios, but even then, if it gets to a point where they can play it on stage, like the enemy team will probably have seen it before, right? I don't really see there being a way of an individual.
Oh, it's not about a surprise, mate. It's more the idea that by having more picks, you can do different comps and do more things in the game, which is what Trimby basically did. One of the problems here is this. Trimby isn't doing this on Rogue's time, guys. He's practicing this shit on his own time and talking with LS, as well as being a pro player. So spoiler, there's very few players going to do that. Like I said about that Steph Curry example, you don't go, well, I'm brilliant at three-pointers, so forget practicing three-pointers. Time for me to go for dunks. You have to still practice the three-pointers to be the best. So if you're the best at like a range of meta champs that are all fucking OP in the meta, you have to keep practicing them and do another two things on the side. And by the way, you're trying niche shit that might not even work. It might end up being an absolute dead end and you just burned 10 hours of your week on that.
And to your point earlier as well, Paul, you mentioned how there's 100 plus champions. I believe it's 160 or something along those lines now. So how many of those champions can they realistically practice as well as the 2 or 3 champions they're supposed to be practicing for the current meta? It's hard to say, okay, you have your 4 or 5 champions that your coach wants you to learn because you might get banned 1, 2, or 3. So you have to have your 2 opposite picks. You've got your favorite pick, your comfort pick that you're practicing as well. And then now you also want guys to go out and try to pick out niche picks, which in solo queue, some of the guys that you play with might not know at all what that champion does because they haven't seen it in so long. And so all you get is false information from this champion. It could be.
And that's an additional layer too, where like in the context of Trimby, what's so amazing is obviously he's a support laner, which means that like not only he, but his laning partner have to know how those matchups play out, where the timings are, so on and so forth. And so it's like what Trimby's doing is pretty insane.
And also, I will say, most players just have a natural tendency and style. And the thing about Trimby is he basically could play anything. Whereas, as you see, it is that Hylissang had a bad split, but he also is on basically almost the diametrically opposed fucking champion pool and style from what he likes to play. So if you threw him on like Pike and Thresh tomorrow, I'm sure it'd be half decent if they were in the meta. If not good.
That's the interesting point I actually want to bring up is why aren't there more stylistic teams in the West? Why does it seem like the West mostly has 2 or 3 styles they really pick? And I mean, why don't we see more teams that were like early T1 before MSI, where they were very much long poke engage? So they played things like Vex to Vex, Varus, things like that, where they could poke you from a distance and then quickly engage and then kind of like, I think you mentioned it in one of your shows before, Thorin, like guerrilla warfare. They quickly poke you, run away, and then go hide. Why don't we have any of those sort of really adaptations in the West? I thought that would be one of our best qualities we could have.
I think it takes an elite, like you mentioned T1, like it takes a very elite team and coaching staff to think up the strategy and then actually execute it to that degree. And you know, I just don't know if the West, at least at the current state, has the right people in the right places. Like, it could be done, but have we ever really seen a Western team define the meta in the last couple of years?
Well, I think the bottom line is like, what are you playing for, right? There's that Double If podcast with all the CEOs or whatever. And one of the questions that came up on it was, would you rather, which is a stupid question, would you rather make it to Worlds every year or win your region? And then someone pointed out, well, if you win your region, obviously you get it. But all of the CEOs were like, oh, 100% win the region. Like winning the region is what matters ultimately for like a business perspective or whatever. And I think within the context of NA, every year there's some number of top teams or teams in general that try and do the Asian thing. They try and do whatever the early game or the these picks or so on and so forth. And then they start falling down the table. And as soon as that happens, the answer of Old Faithful comes back where it's like, okay, let's just play low execution, late game scaling comps and hope that we win. Or let's just play team fighting comps and hope that we win. And let's not actually press ourselves to get early advantages. And then if you do manage to do that and succeed, you go to Worlds and you get shit on because the other teams can't exploit you early. And so it's like, it's a hard choice where it's like, do you want to be competitive just in case you get to Worlds? And especially if you're from NA, it's like, there's no guarantee of that. No matter what you do, like you're probably going to get stomped and might not even make it out of group. So is the best option just for it from a business perspective, from a legacy perspective, especially because there's so many like ring counters and that's what's deciding who the GOATs are. Like, isn't it better for you as a player and organization to just year after year go back to Old Faithful?
I don't think most people, the pros aren't thinking any of that. That's what we talk about on talk shows with our big picture narratives. Like, all the pros are trying to do is get the best champion they can in this game, to carry this game, to win this game, to be the champion, and then go to Worlds and be the champion there. Like, they're trying to really simplistic switch, one foot in front of the other. So I would say, for example, the reason the T1 one's a bit sketch, actually, it'd be better if you could have done LPL, is because I only think T1 even did that and discovered that exactly because they had to, like, cover the fact that Faker wasn't the god mid laner. Like, spoiler, if Faker was Chovy, you wouldn't have played that way. You'd have just picked the strongest champions in the meta, like an LPL team would, and then you just smash them with whoever your best players are. So, in my opinion, in the West, I mean, it's just obvious, like, worse players, worse coached, worse practice, worse fucking competitive games, worse understanding of the meta, inability to speak Mandarin or fucking Korean. Like, I think there's obvious reasons that constantly, like, gate them and ring them in and make it just so you can't be as good. And then I'd also say the way people build teams, because it's not CSGO, you can't construct a team. All you can do is get a bunch of players you hope work together. Half the time, like Team Liquid, you don't even know that actually there's no synergy points because this guy's like a lone jungler, but then this guy's a supported mid lane, and then this guy's like a top lane who's fucking inching, but then the bot lane has to only play hard through bot. Like, they haven't even thought through basic shit like that. It's like they're just throwing rosters together. Like, I don't know a single sport that works that way. In every single sport where the coach isn't fired, you intentionally build from next season by what you lacked in the former. Like, it doesn't matter if you're the worst NFL team, you're looking to shore up your weaknesses. You've got your strengths already. You can add a couple of pieces there. Like, you're always trying to figure out like how to be more of a complete team. In League of Legends, it's like you just throw players in a server and then you just figure out like, right, what's the game right now? What's the meta right now? What are the picks? Let's just figure something out quick.
And
you can't really plan for that.
After building such an amazing sandcastle, Riot can just walk by and shit on it 2 weeks later. Well, a meta change can render that whole team useless, essentially.
Well, about that point,
which is what actually I think. Sorry to cut you off, but I think the meta changing aspect of Riot, I think that also is a big factor in the conservative nature of LCS teams and not wanting to break from the meta, because what they basically this falling back to their fundamentals of team fighting is essentially foolproof when it comes to it's basically almost the most meta resistant thing they can do with and while still having a mild ability to compete internationally.
So what I was going to say too is that we always talk about Riot changing things and changing the meta, but also you see a lot of the pro players, like you said, are very stagnant in the picks that they actually choose. So on some level, even though Riot changes the meta, there's still definitely things that we know sort of work regardless of the meta changing. Like you mentioned LCS being the tried and true, go to the tank top, go to the engage support, go to the hyper carry ADC, go to the mid laner that does some AP damage or has a control mage mid. Those things always come out almost regardless of what the meta is to kind of win the season. Right. So on some level, it has to be that they're afraid or they don't actually think that there's different ways to play the game, because when you look across the pond as it is, you see way different champions being picked and the meta being completely different. Like, it's kind of now what's the problem with LCS and why I'm, not necessarily excited about anyone other than Cloud9's chances of doing anything at Worlds is our meta compared to the rest of the world, the global meta is weird. It's whack. We're just doing Seraphine bot lanes, like I said before. And we always fall back to that. So why is that Riot can change things and yet they still just will pick the same champions? It has to be stylistically defined. You have to, like you said, Thorin, you have to pick people who know kind of what they want their style to be. Hillsong is a great example, being that he is an engaged support. He wants to play engages. He will play the enchanters, but that's not the Hillsong way. He wants to play engaged supports. Where is the team building around those aspects of their players? Find out what your players are, find out what they can do, build around that instead. And don't worry about the meta so much, because we don't care about the meta now anyway. We just do whatever we think works in our region.
Sure.
With the with the Seraphine point, is that more so saying that we see less Kalista, Draven, and basically early game carries?
Well, the Callista point or the Seraphine point to me is because we think that our ADCs that are not named Berserker are really bad at carrying team fights. The way that I see that Seraphine fits into the meta is that because it's a stand behind other champions champion that can both heal and deal out damage, slows, and other things around without being touched because of its long range, makes it a valuable pick in LCS because people are not good at dive comps, really. They're not really good at just getting on to something that's high priority, blowing it up quickly because they lack the hands to execute a move like that. So Seraphine becomes really valuable in the sense that she can just basically stand still and press R and just ruin a whole team fight for everybody, for the entire enemy team, because they're not going to execute their dive correctly. I don't think that it's actually good. And like you said, we don't see them because people, I think it's both ways. Our ADCs are either, if they are good enough, their teammates aren't confident enough to actually play with the Dravens and the Kallistas or any of the early game ADCs to actually make it work. Because it's not that Draven's actually that great of a champion right now. It's just that he's good into things like Sivir and Zeri. Draven himself is not super strong. It's just because he counters those meta ADCs, that's why he's picked. And you won't see a lot of people that are like, I think Neon had made this point on the Best
Damn League show.
Best Damn League show, where he basically said he doesn't play Draven because he doesn't think that his teammates are really set up to play around a Draven. So for him to actually pull that out, he would feel like he'd be inting his team or the game right away, which makes perfect sense. If your teammates don't understand how or what you need on a champion to play around it, then picking the champion is just bad for the team, right? But what I think is weird is that we come to these conclusions without like really trying them at all. I understand.
No, here's the thing. I always say this on shows, and I'm one of the only people who consistently says this. These teams are not stupid. They are not idiots. They can watch VODs of LCK. What happens is, if they play a bunch of scrims and they can't win with Kalista, but they can win with Seraphine, they are going to run Seraphine. That probably implies that everyone who isn't Berserker and FBI just couldn't play the other picks.
Yeah,
or be played around them and get wins in scrims. Like, that is still a massive factor. People need to believe that their scrims meant something. That's still a big deal in the West, especially. You're LEC as well.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that Seraphine's meta because the people, like the counter to the meta would be the Draven and Kalista, but people just can't play them. So it becomes the best pick because those picks aren't playable in LCS. Because people can't win with the Kalista and Draven into the Seraphine.
I feel like the West is also in this kind of weird era where, like, you know, looking back in the day, like, even reasonably recently, like, there were just certain players who they seem to be like, give me the fucking ball, like, I'm going to carry the game, right? Like, the Forgivens, like, the double ifs, Upset to a certain degree at one point. Caps was like that, Perks was like that. And, like, when I look across NA, like, I kind of, like, I feel confident when, you know, Berserker gets his pick, like he's probably going to carry. To a certain degree, I feel similar about like Azir when it comes to Abadage, but like there's not too many players who just say like, okay, yeah, no, give me the Draven. Even though Han Sama, you know, was famous for basically being like a Draven one trick, he's like, nah, don't give me that. Bjergsen's not taking Zillion, instead he's taking Galio, so on and so forth. And that,
I mean, the joke is, you know, the last guy who did that was Perks.
Yeah.
And you saw it worked out for him, mate. So think about this. Logically, since it's not the most competitive European player coming over, except Perks, they're just not going to do that. Like, the kind of guy who comes to LCS is Abadage, like you said. He's just sort of like, mate, I've landed a really fucking good job here, and they think I'm one of the best. I better keep my head down and just fucking see how long I can ride this thing out for. He's not coming over to go, I am the god of NA, I challenge you all 1v1. No, that's how you get exposed and shit canned out the league as soon as possible, mate.
Also, Thor, I want to go back to that point that you mentioned before about scrims mattering, because it is important for the teams to think that what they're doing is working, right? But we have an example just recently with LEC where Rogue was losing most of their scrims, and instead of just inwardly shutting down and going, well, we can't play any of these aggressive picks. I mean, I don't know exactly how their scrims are working either, so maybe they were doing that before and they just said, let's do aggressive picks because they were getting shut down. but they basically came out with a mentality ready to kill, right? They just said, fuck it, we're going to go in and we're going to go for it and not play quote unquote rogue champions. So, and we always hear about in the West how terrible scrims are, that scrims don't matter, or that people fuck around in scrims or don't do this or don't do that. So I don't know how we can say at the same time that we're really testing or trying out our picks or actually like getting any good information from our scrims if we just also are saying that scrims are really bad and practice is shitty.
Sure. I mean, that's not my paradox, though, is it? That's theirs to resolve.
That's true. It's not like you're there saying, okay.
No, exactly. I'm not the one who said either way, but
the LCS is stuck in 1984.
I mean, let's be real. Yeah, Western regions want to have their cake and eat it. That's pretty much another cultural problem in it.
Yeah.
So there was another like niche peak thing. I don't know if it's on Damn League show, but there was a scrim result. They said they would play like Tarek Zed bot lane. So like, what's stopping that from like going out on a stage match? Just people just the same attitude issue. It's like, we don't believe this will work, but it's like
nothing. You can choose to do it if you want.
Right. But no one does it. So like, why does no one do it then?
I mean, here's the other reason, right? You're all talking with hindsight, knowing which teams failed. And some of the ones that failed, you're like, why did you just try doing that? They didn't know they were going to fail, mate. In scrims, maybe they were winning. Like maybe Mad Lions came in the playoffs thinking they were going to win LEC. So why would they be fucking around with like, you know, these mad bot lanes like this? Like, again, you're acting like it's a movie and we can sort of like know, right? Oh, he's not going to be able to beat the boss if he doesn't have like something crazy to pull out. Like that's like mighty dog shit, dude. Like most players are just trying to be the best player they can. They might not even think of themselves long term as a player for this one team. They're just an ADC. They're trying to play the strongest picks now. That's what all the other ADCs do. And the coach is telling them, study Viper, study Ruler. Like, they're trying to do the best. Like, remember, some of these guys are 19 as well. Like, they're not fucking people with an insane view on life and loads of experience. They're just kids playing a game. And they are playing. Emphasis playing.
Yeah, that's very true. I personally just want more Western teams to stop following whatever the Eastern teams do. I think we've done it for 10 years. It's enough is enough. They're going to be better at doing what they're doing. Well,
isn't that what isn't that Seraphine in a nutshell though? Shouldn't we be continuing to do this Seraphine shit then? Shouldn't you be praising that?
That's American business culture though, is copycat everything, right? Like the guy next to you is doing something good. He's making $1 more than you, copy him. Right.
Here's the sad thing. It's just the circuit that's denying you guys the satisfaction you want. Because essentially, if we round up all these topics, they all lead towards, like, why doesn't LCS do more that could make them win at Worlds? Like, winning Worlds is never going to happen. So forget that. What you actually want is just to feel like you had a chance, right? Well, spoil it. If you had a circuit like CSGO, dude, there are like semi-pro teams that make like semis of the major if they have an amazing run and this guy catches fire and they have the right couple of tournaments. Maybe they get underestimated. They come in, they beat the right underdog, big dog who like was, you know, weak on that map. And then they go through this one and it takes a few matches till people start to get a read on them. Like that would happen if it was an open circuit. Like if you watch games like CSGO and Dota, that is common, mate. Even in fucking Valorant to some degree, that happens a bit. Like in these games, it can happen. The problem is the circuit Riot has created just absolutely means that's not going to happen. Like the worst region, NA of the major ones, has, and this is what's crazy, it's not only the worst of the major regions, it doesn't even have what now minor regions have. Like, you know what, if you're the top PCS team, you can get some scrims with LPL just because of your geolocation, because the people you'll know in the you can't, LCS is the worst of all factors, and because you don't have an open circuit, you can't even, like Dota, just fly the fucking good team to all the tournaments and have them play there and be really good. So I think there's so many factors that, what I hate about League of Legends is Riot created all these factors that painted them in the corner, and then everyone just looks to me and goes like, why can't they just get out? And say, I didn't make them bloody do that. I would have told them not to paint themselves in a corner, but they've done that. And if you notice, they will never fundamentally change the big things. So they tweak the small details. You get a slot here. Maybe there's a different format for who goes in what groups in Worlds, but you never just open it up. Because by the way, not only would you have had more like interesting brackets and stuff, you'd have also, by the way, I'll say it right now, maybe by fluke, an NA team might have won Worlds by now. It might have happened. There'd have been a way higher chance than what we currently have, in my opinion.
I agree, Thorin. I think it is a lot of us wanting us to at least have a chance. For me, though, what I think is a distinction that I would, even if we go out really quick, what I want to see is just them going out on their shield as I think is the term is, right? I want to see them go hard, try everything they can, even if they go 0-30 versus an LPL team, at least they fucking try. That's what I want. I don't want kind of the pathetic whining that happens every year where we just kind of get swept away and go, okay, now NA is gone and we can actually start enjoying some League of Legends again. But I also think, like, you're right. If they opened it up basically to the same point of where relegation was back in the day, where you saw teams and people sweating, knowing that they might get pushed out of the league. Obviously, they can't do that now with all the money they've invested in the franchising. They're just not going to kick those teams out right now. But if they did, and that was a thought process in the back of their heads, maybe they would actually push hard. Maybe they would actually try. Maybe we would see more. Like, I don't hate Seraphine bot lane if it's done in a way where you actually have damage around it. If you have a AD mid like Aurelia, which is something that I think the last time I saw it was Perks playing it, like you said, when he was there. Last Aurelia mid I think I've ever seen, or maybe Fudge did one when he was mid. I don't know for sure. But you don't see those kind of combinations coming out with Seraphine. You just see really lackadaisical scaling prey kind of comps coming out with that. That's my problem. I want to see going out in your shield, aggression, actually trying, and just...
Then you got to incentivize them. As we've just discussed, you've incentivized for a safe approach that generally works in most metas, gets you 2 worlds, gives you a crack at winning LCS, which means you can parlay it into the better sponsor deals, and then you bring in players, but sometimes you bring them in for the big name, more so than the game. There's a million factors. So essentially, what are the incentives? Like, there's 2 types of people in the world. The self-driven people, and they're very rare, and unfortunately, a lot of them are driven by damage and trauma. They're just the ones that didn't do something terrible to themselves or collapse entirely. It forged them into some sort of fucked up berserk warrior. Then there's the type of people that only follow incentives, and they sort of have to be cattle prodded or lured with the carrot. And if you do a very good job setting up that structure, you can get them into the right positions. But I think in LCS and in League of Legends in general, they've done a terrible job with that. And then it just so happens Koreans don't need that as a culture. They're the self-motivated one, because again, the ones that aren't get bombed out. In China, it's a mixture of the two, but then they've got so many people to throw at it, they can always make it work. In Europe, I'd say, all I'll say is this. You might think, well, maybe Europe's a bit more like a NA. Look how many people... You know, famously, EU LCS used to be full of Danes. Do you remember that? There are fuck all Danes in the ULCS. Everyone in the ULCS now, go and look, is from like the Balkan countries or like Eastern Europe or like there's so many from these countries, mate. Like they're the places where like Neon, mate, probably is making banger money on misfits for the country he's from. If you're someone like Perks, that's why you did the 1 year in NA. You didn't really think you'd win Worlds. You were like, mate, I am a king for the rest of my life of that 6 million or whatever it was. Wouldn't really be 6 million. I'm sure it's really a couple of million people. That was like the total value of the deal, wasn't it? Like these people have their own motivational reasons, and you notice how many of them are background-based, cultural-based. It's not that G2 sat down and went, right, what's the best way to motivate this young guy to be great? It's like he already had his own reason. You know?
Yeah.
That's like the sad part to me, though. It's just like, as someone who's been watching League of Legends from the very beginning and who, like, I used to be able to go to IEMs or whatever, or, you know, watch the tournaments at a minimum online between, like, M5 and TSM, whatever. Like, just knowing now that it will never get better makes it so hard to continue to invest in, like, the West.
You can get lucky. You can get, like, G2 2019. It can happen.
Oh, sure,
you can have a miracle team.
But I guess what I mean is like all the things like the open circuit, right? Like I've been wanting an open circuit again forever. And it's just like, that just won't happen. Like the structures in place, infrastructure wise, mean there is zero world where that will happen.
That's why you start watching CSGO, mate. Then you don't
Which
have to
is why I started watching CSGO.
There you go.
Yeah.
Problem solved. Yeah. Or if you don't like that, by the way, if you're not an FPS guy, try Dota. Watch Dota 2.
Yeah. Fair enough. I mean, and that might just be the solution, but it just feels so bad where you're just like, wow, like the solution exists. Everyone but Riot knows the solution exists, and it's not like hypothetical. We see CSGO, we see Dota. Riot literally did it themselves before the LCS, but now, like, you know, maybe 3 years from now, they'll be like, hey, we're adding a third international tournament, and that's the best thing we'll get.
It's because, to be fair, they have done a 10-year business approach that was about getting franchising slots and building up, like, regional things. So they've just gone the exact opposite direction is the issue. And to them, it's not as simple as just flip it all tomorrow. Like, if tomorrow Golden Guardians is like, wait, what? So if we're, like, 7th best, like, we're just out of all the tournaments immediately on day one and we get no exposure, no one cares about us, we have no... What the fuck? Like, that's the problem. The business part... by the way, isn't that the ultimate fucking bottom line of the things that have corrupted the best parts of America? Just fucking corporatism, sheer greed for profits, caring more about optics and images over substance and stuff like. I know a lot of this is fucking hackneyed material, but there's a reason people bring it up. It's, the large trends, they make sense, right?
But yeah,
I think we'll go on and make the final point.
If it's all about like selling skins, right? Why would they invest more money? Right, there something similar came up recently.
Why would who invest more money?
Or like, why would Riot Games invest more money into like a product where basically the returns are clearly fine, right, for them, right? If they're already making the amount of money they want to make off.
Oh, I don't think Riot gives a fuck about any winning worlds, mate. I think again that's us in conversations.
Not about winning worlds, but just like in terms of like.
No, why would they care about any of it? Like you said,
the league is an advertisement. Yeah, like why would you expand something?
And the joke of this is, mate, they even like swindled these fucking teams into paying them tens of millions of dollars to play in the shit.
Yeah, like for example, if something's like whatever is left of the Halo community recently became outraged over the developer not adding certain features that were promised. When a game goes from like 250 active players down to 2,000 on a free-to-play model, like there's literally I don't see a world where any investment into the things the players wants warrants a return on that investment.
This video was kindly supported by Kill Your Inner Loser, Ahmed Hadjou, Matt Pugnatio Rajcula, Paul Villa, Travis Goff, Adam Ochs, Animosity, Bot Pounder 420, Hades, Jensen Goh, Kovacevicd, Pacy, Tobias Bernasconi, Tosh, Tooorin, and as always, special thanks goes out to Jerky's Minion. Do you want to suggest a topic or a guest for my shows? Would you like to ask a question in my Patreon AMA? Maybe you want teasers, find out who the next Reflections guests are or upcoming talk show guests. Do you want to take part in one of those long donated discussions with me? Well, if any of the above or more sound interesting to you, put your money where your mouth is. Join the Illuminati today via the Patreon link in the description box below.